Hi there, this is Anna from Anna Aspnes Designs. Today is the first week of October and we're celebrating fall with a brand new autumn themed collection named Amidst. And I often get the inspiration for the names of my collections just from the sorts of words that I'm thinking about during this time of year. And so I'm kind of thinking along the lines of amidst a new season or amidst the leaves that are now beginning to fall in Colorado. And I'm particularly inspired by the blush pinks that come through the maple trees at this time of year. And so I've created a collection around that. There are 5 products, and this is really for photo enthusiasts, digital scrapbookers, and digital artists that want to combine their photos with art to create composite style images. So if we head into the ArtPlay palette, you'll see that it is delivered again in 2 folders. This is to allow for easier and faster download, and I'm going to head into the first folder, which includes the brush set, the elements, also known as embellishments, and also the papery. If I go ahead and click on the brushes folder, you'll see that you get 16 different brush files, also known as digital stamps. These can be used in their transparent background PNG format by dragging them into your workspace, or you can load the included ABR file, which is compatible with both the full version of Photoshop and Adobe Photoshop Elements. So you can see that you have various textures and theme style images within that folder. Next we have the elements. These are the more dimensional elements. They are delivered in a variety of formats. For the more complex embellishments, I like to include a PSD file which can be used in your version. Simply open that into your workspace and you'll have access to all the individual layers. And this is particularly helpful for when you want to change the color of an element or increase the intensity of the drop shadow. So there are a number of different elements included with this ArtPlay palette. There's a flower, a frame, a leaf, and you can see that with the leaves I've got 3 different elements within that folder. Not only have I included the leaf with the drop shadow applied and the PSD file, but I've also included those elements separately for those users who are using a different photo editing software program. So we have leaves and a twig, and then we have a variety of other elements to which you can apply a drop shadow layer style. So these elements and folders contain cast shadows, while these elements can just simply have a standard drop shadow layer style applied to them using the tools in Adobe Photoshop. And then we have the papery, which is always the most fun part of the ArtPlay palette. Again, you get 4 different artsy designs. And then there are 4 coordinating solid papers which can be used with the transfers, which are included in the second part of the folder. And you get 12 different transfers in this particular collection. A couple of art strokes, a couple of overlays. You can see that there is a variety of texture, color, and also different shapes. There is a paint splatter there. Some nice gold leaves. I like the sparkle in this collection, and you can see the blush hues that are coming through, and I've incorporated them with a little bit of yellow to reflect the sunlight that is shining off the leaves at this time of year. And you can see the preview of those elements here. So the idea being is that you will open these elements into your workspace, drag them on top of a solid paper, and then you can start creating your own artsy paper. As well as the ArtPlay palette, there is also a template, and this one actually includes a color transfer. This allows you to have various layers. If I open this PSD file into my workspace, you can see all the different layers in the layers panel, and you can recolor any of those layers, or you can clip images from the ArtPlay palette to any of those layers as well to create a quick and easy layout. You can use that template in its entirety, or you can simply use pieces of it to incorporate in your own composition. Next up, we have some nice autumn word art, and I always like to include a variety. We've got a beaded thread so that these small alphabetic buttons can be used independently and they can be mixed up to create new words. You can also use that stitching as a separate element. There are a couple of metal words which are amidst the theme of autumn, and they have a slight blush hue to them. Even though they're metal, they could be recolored. You could make them more gold or more silver simply by using the hue and saturation. And then there are a number of different titles. We have a total of 9, all relating to our theme, and then a couple of word transfers. And the idea is to mix and match these to build title elements for your pages. I've included the PSD file for the beaded threads so that you can extract those different alphabetical buttons and the urban threads, and I also have included an ABR file which you can load into your brushes panel and use with the paintbrush tool in Adobe Photoshop or Elements. And then we have the MultiMedia Accordion No. 1, which is proving to be a favorite in this particular collection. And it is basically a collection of 4 different frame elements. These are multi-layer elements delivered in both PSD and PNG format, and they have a kind of a cool dimensional and perspective slant to them. I have organized the frames into 4 separate folders. This allows you to access the PSD file, and I've included the PNG file separately for those users not working in Adobe Photoshop. You can see I have grouped the masks together, but they can be easily extracted using a selection tool. So that is the first one, and then we have the second one. If I go ahead and open up that PSD into the workspace, you can see that we have the shadow, the various mask, and the frame layers that make up the different frames. So there are 4 different elements to choose from, which are pictured in the preview. And then finally we have painted leaves, which are really fun brushes with various watercolor and textural components. So you can see that the watercolor bleeds out from the leaf design. There's also a fun sketch component in there, some hand-drawn lines, a little bit of canvas style texture, and then also some embossing as well. So the different leaves will have different features, obviously. So there's a tape element in this one, for example, and more of the sketching. I like how the sketching sort of outlines the watery nature of the underlying leaf. And then there is a little bit of text in there as well. And finally, there are 7 of those to play with. You can use them by dragging them into your workspace and using the transparent PNG file, or you can load the brushes into your brushes panel and use them with the paintbrush tool. There are 2 different brush sets with this particular set because many of these brushes are more than or greater in size than 2500 pixels. So the large ABR file is for Photoshop CC and Adobe Photoshop Elements 15, and then the other ABR file is for all other users of Adobe Photoshop and Elements. So that is the collection, and I have selected this photo, and I wanted to create a quick layout to show you how I would use some of these art supplies. So first of all, I am going to go into my ArtPlay palette and I want to access the papery folder. And to make it really easy on myself, I always like to use the artsy papers. Why make it harder on yourself than you have to when the work has already been done? So I've got 4 different ArtPlay palette papers to choose from. I'm going to go ahead and drag this one into my workspace, and I'm going to go to Image, Duplicate, and create a copy of that paper so that I can close out the original and keep it safe in terms of its lossy format. And so I'm going to be working on this paper as my foundation. Next, I am going to go and select a frame in which to put my photo. Let's go ahead and drag the photo into our workspace as well. So we have that ready and waiting to go, and then go back and grab our frame. And I'm going to use the second frame in the set, which is number 2. I'm going to use the PSD file and I'm going to drag that into my workspace. Once you have that image in your workspace, you'll be able to see that you have the corresponding layers listed in the Layers panel. With the Move tool selected from the Tools panel, you want to hold down the Shift button on your keyboard, ensure that you have either the first or the last layer selected. Hold down the Shift button on your keyboard and then select the last or the first. Basically, you want to make sure that you have all of those layers highlighted. And then when that is the case, you want to ensure that you have the auto select option unchecked, and then drag that into your foundation, and then you can position it as preferred. I'm going to add a slight slant to mine, so I'm going to go ahead and rotate it using the transform controls, and then click on the check mark to accept that transformation. Now I can go ahead and close out this frame because we no longer need the file. So the idea here is we're going to move this photo and have it appear in all 3 areas of this frame. So to do this, you want to have the Move tool selected from the Tools panel, and then you're going to click and drag that image and place it over the frame. Now I already have a slight slant to my image, and so I don't need to rotate my photo at this point, but it could be that you want to rotate your photo so that it matches the angle of the element into which you're placing your image. You also want to make sure that your image covers all 3 of the masks in your frame. You can see that my photo currently is a little large. You can use the opacity slider in your Layers panel to bring down the opacity so that you can see that underlying frame and how the photo would be positioned in those masks. And so that looks pretty good. If I wanted to, I could hold down the Shift button, or if you are working in Adobe Photoshop Elements, you're going to want to make sure you have that constrained proportions box checked, and you could go ahead and you could resize that image as preferred. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that transformation. Increase the opacity to 100. I will go ahead and close out this original photo, seeing as we now have the image on our foundation. I'm then going to drag that image down above the first of the mask layers. So you can either start with the third or the first, it doesn't really matter. I always tend to work backwards for some reason, but you could start with the first mask if you wanted to. You want to place that image directly above the mask layer, and then you want to go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask. And then now you can see that that photo clips down onto the mask and sort of conforms to the shape of the frame layer. You're then going to drag that layer down to the new layer icon at the bottom of the Layers panel in Adobe Photoshop, or up to the top of the panel if you're working in Elements, to create a duplicate copy of that layer. You're then going to drag that duplicate copy down or up, depending on which direction you're working, and place it above the next of the frame masks. And then you're going to repeat that process. You're going to go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask. And then finally, we'll do that process one more time. We're going to duplicate it and then drag it down above the last of our frame layers and go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask. Now this is perfectly acceptable, looks great to me, but there are a few little tricks I wanted to share so that you can make the most out of these perspective frames. The first one being is the perspective tool. We can actually manipulate these images just slightly using the perspective tool to make them better fit with the frame. To do this, you're going to go to Edit, Transform, and Perspective, and you're going to see a bounding box around your image, and then these two controls, the cancel and the accept transformation, are going to become active. And the perspective tool allows us to change the perspective of the photo in accordance with the frame. If you look at this first part of the frame, the first window, you can see that the height of the image on the left hand side is slightly greater than that on the right, and we can mirror that in our image by clicking on one of these corner points and moving it either in or out. In this case, we want to move it in because we want to cinch it on the right hand side of the photo. You don't want to go too far because that's going to distort your image too much, but just enough to add a little bit of realism to the image. It's very subtle, but it does make a difference. Then you can accept that transformation and move on to the next photo. Now this frame, we have the photo cinching on the left hand side instead of the right. So in this particular window, the image is taller on the right hand side than it is the left. So now we're going to go to Edit, Transform, and Perspective, and then this time cinch the image on the left hand side. Just ever so slightly. You want to make sure that the horizons still line up when you perform this action, and it could be that you have to actually go back to the first one and just marry that up and make sure that they are in line. But notice already how it's making a difference. And then accept that transformation, and then finally do the same thing with the last of the photos. Edit, Transform, Perspective, and we're going back to the right hand side again, and we're just going to cinch that on the right. I'm going to go back to that first photo and go back to the transform controls and just make sure that we have the horizon lining up how we want it to. You want to have a nice smooth transition. So that's how you adjust the perspective. The other little trick I had up my sleeve for you was to use the gradient tool to add a little bit of shadowing to your frame. And to do this, I am going to use the polygonal lasso tool and roughly trace around the edge of the frame. You want to make sure that you go beyond the boundaries of the photo, so you want to trace around the frame. And then you're going to create a new layer above the photo layer and go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask. Next, you're going to select the gradient tool from the tools panel, and you want to make sure that you have this second gradient selected. I'm also going to click on the default controls in the bottom of the tools panel to make my foreground color black and my background color white. And then I'm simply going to create a quick gradient like that and apply a soft light blending mode. And then you can go to select, deselect. I'm now going to go to that third frame. So we have a shadow and then we have a highlight. So we want to go to this third frame, create a new layer, select the polygonal lasso tool from the tools panel, trace around the edge of the frame, making sure that there is an area of the frame next to the photo. Another way to add the clipping mask is to drag that new layer into the clipping set and then drag it back up to the top of the photo, and then we're going to repeat that same action, create a gradient, and then apply a soft light blending mode. Go select, deselect, and now you can see that we've added a slight shadow to two portions of our image, furthering the dimensional component of the frame. Finally, we can complete this layout by adding a title. So I am going to navigate back to my word art, and we can bring in a couple of these. We can bring in the Amidst. Let's go with Spice of Life, and then maybe a word transfer. I'm going to drag those directly onto my canvas, and they are going to place, and you can see I am accepting the transformation and or the placement of those elements as each one is brought in. And then it's just a question of placing and maybe even resizing those elements as preferred. So we could move this down here and then maybe place that there like that. And that's how you add a photo to one of these accordion frames in a realistic fashion by using the perspective tool and the gradients tool. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and please go check out the Amidst collection in the Anna Aspnes Designs store. I'll provide all links for products used in this layout below this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.